Have you ever imagined yourself coming across a creature that shouldn't exist? Something that defies everything you believe to be real? In the middle of Germany, in the 1980s, a military base became the scene of a supernatural mystery that would put any horror story to shame. Soldiers accustomed to confronting physical threats began to deal with something far beyond their capabilities, a monster that seemed to have come straight out of urban legends. It was a werewolf or cryptid that appeared out of nowhere and disappeared without a trace. With each new sighting, the fear grew, and what began as a simple rumor soon turned into a chilling story that would never be forgotten. But what would lead such a monster to haunt such a specific location? The answer, apparently, lies in the past, in a curse that dates back to the times of Napoleon. Apparently, this creature was not just a wild animal, but a figure carrying a supernatural burden, as if it were an echo from the past, a legend that had returned to exact its price. Each new sighting and each strange event only reinforced the feeling that something much bigger was happening there, something that human eyes could not fully understand, but that fear insisted on reminding us of. If that were not enough, paranormal phenomena began to appear at the base, as if a door to another world had been opened. Equipment failed, sniffer dogs retreated in panic, and no one could explain what was really happening. This was not just any werewolf. It was as if the environment itself was impregnated with dark forces. It was as if the Morbach monster had brought with it something deeper, something that messed with the minds and senses of all who dared to get too close, something hellish. And like every good horror story, there was yet another layer of mystery. It is believed that the violation of an ancient sanctuary was the trigger for this chain of events, awakening what should never have been disturbed. And now, the soldiers were at the mercy of a creature that seemed to be more than a legend, more than a cryptid. It was a shadow from the past, determined to show that certain mistakes do not go unpunished. The question is, how far was this creature willing to go, and who could stop something that transcends the physical world? In the 1980s, during the Cold War, Hahn Air Base in West Germany became the scene of stories that would make anyone's skin crawl. Imagine a place full of highly trained soldiers, where no one would expect to see fear on faces accustomed to danger. It was there that reports began to emerge about a creature called the Morbach monster, a being that seemed to have escaped straight from an urban legend. Among the soldiers, the rumors were strong. A bipedal, colossal wolf that watched them from the darkness. It prowled the base as if it were its own territory. When we talk about werewolves and other cryptids, common sense tends to dismiss these tales as mere scare stories. But what do you do when those who see them are trusted men who swear they witnessed something inexplicable? In this scenario, the figure of the Morbach monster becomes even more enigmatic. In that military environment where everything seems to be under control, the appearance of a wolf on its feet was so surreal that it was difficult to ignore. It was as if reality itself was playing a trick on the soldiers, and they were caught in a suspenseful mix of folklore and real life. However, the story of a werewolf in the middle of military territory also carries a touch of irony. Soldiers who deal with real threats every day were now disconcerted by a creature they would normally only see in urban legends. This crypto wolf defied logic and military norms, and it was not something a gun could easily solve. It was almost like imagining a horror movie, but without the relief of a movie theater. And with each sunset, the tension increased, making the Morbach monster an indisputable part of that atmosphere. As the stories spread throughout the base, even the most skeptical began to question whether there might be some truth to it all. Who knows, after all, what the military eyes saw there in that German darkness? There was something irresistible about the mystery, something that aroused both fear and curiosity. And for the soldiers who claimed to have seen the monster, each night seemed to bring a new chapter in this story of military terror. It was an experience that would undoubtedly make anyone think twice before walking alone among the hangars at night. Thus, A new legend was born, a modern folklore that defied common sense and transformed a watch post into a place of pure suspense. But as with every good story of werewolves and cryptids, there was always more to the story. With each testimony, with each new detail, the Morbach monster was increasingly established as a supernatural figure who seemed not content to simply scare, but to leave a silent warning. It was just the beginning of a series of strange events at Han Base, and the soldiers knew that this chapter was far from over. The rumors of the Morbach monster began to take on a frighteningly real form when soldiers began to find mutilated deer near the perimeter of the base. Imagine, for a moment, the scene. A soldier on patrol, walking through an area where nothing but silence should reign, comes across the corpse of an animal, torn and torn apart. There were no signs of traps, no marks that pointed to a human attack. The condition of the bodies was almost primitive, a brutality that reminded them of an ancient and hungry predator. The soldiers, always alert to the slightest movement, were unprepared for what they would see on one particular night. In the darkness, a security group spotted a huge figure, whose eyes seemed to glow with a frightening intensity. The creature, without hesitation, jumped the fence with supernatural agility, as if the rules of the physical world did not apply to it. This leap of a standing wolf, something completely outside the natural norm, defied everything they knew about the animal kingdom. It was as if they were witnessing a creature straight out of folklore, a modern werewolf manifesting itself before their incredulous eyes. The encounters continued, and increasingly, the figure seemed to play with the soldiers, appearing and disappearing before anyone could raise the alarm. The base, which had always been a safe and organized place, began to acquire an air of mystery, of latent danger. It was no longer just a matter of sightings or urban legends created to scare the newbies. No, here was something concrete, something that was capable of causing a wave of panic even among men accustomed to combat. The Morbach monster, until then a whisper in the shadows, showed that it was willing to be seen. This fear was not only felt by the newbies. Even the most experienced soldiers who had already faced real dangers admitted that the presence of this creature was incomparable. It was a fear that made them question not only their sanity, but also reality. And who could blame them? Seeing a being that seemed part legend, part cryptid defied rationality. Each new encounter became a grim reminder that horror stories don't always remain in the imagination. Sometimes they leap into real life, just when you least expect it. And like all good legends, the mystery only grew. The soldiers, increasingly cautious, knew that these frightening encounters were just the beginning of something much bigger. After all, stories like this don't end without an epic ending, and the Morbach monster seemed determined to leave them even more intrigued. And with each passing night, hearts beat faster, since no one knew when or if they would see that otherworldly gaze again. For many soldiers, the Morbach monster was not just a wild animal out of control, but a supernatural manifestation of something much older. One legend stood out among the stories: the Napoleonic curse of Thomas Schwitzer. Schwitzer, a soldier during the Napoleonic Wars, was said to have been cursed, transforming himself into a werewolf that roamed the German forests. It is as if, upon his death, his soul was destined to return as a cursed creature, perpetuating the lineage of fear and mystery in that region. This was a theory that stirred the soldiers' psyche, as if they were dealing with an unsolvable enigma. The idea that the Morbach monster was the reincarnation of Schwitzer made many reflect on the power of curses and folklore. In popular culture, werewolves and cryptids are seen as creatures outside the real world, but for these soldiers, the weight of the curse seemed to have crossed the line of imagination. Think about how many times we've heard stories of ancestors returning to settle scores, or urban legends that survive through collective fear. It was as if the base was filled with an energy that transcended logic, and this story of a centuries-old curse only added to the somber atmosphere and mystery. For those who believe in the power of curses, it's easy to understand how the idea of a cursed werewolf gained traction. After all, if past stories shape the present, what kind of connection would a place like Hahn have with such a legend? German folklore is full of stories of wandering souls, broken pacts, and vengeful spirits, and many of the soldiers began to think that perhaps they had been caught in the middle of something much older than themselves. This theory, this connection to the past, gave a new layer to the presence of the Morbach monster, as if he were a materialized ghost from Napoleonic times. The weight of the curse made the darkness of the night itself seem denser. The mere fact of stepping onto ground where a haunted soul supposedly roamed was enough to affect everyone's mood. Soldiers who had once walked with confidence now hesitated when making their nightly patrols, as if expecting to see Schwitzer's shadow around every corner. And in a way, the Morbach monster seemed to enjoy this atmosphere. His very presence seemed to be a living or almost living reminder that certain stories are not just forgotten tales, but forces that endure and endure through generations. With each recounting, the figure of Schwitzer became more real, more present, as if he were writing a new urban legend before the soldiers' eyes. For those who believed in the curse theory, it all made sense. It was the cycle of history repeating itself, proof that the past can manifest itself in horribly unexpected ways. And as this belief spread, the soldiers knew that each new encounter with the Morbach monster was like a page being turned in a story that was still far from over. As encounters with the Morbach monster became more frequent, something even more disturbing began to occur at the base: unexplained paranormal phenomena. Imagine security cameras failing for no apparent reason, and canine units, always fearless, refusing to advance in certain areas. The soldiers began to wonder if the presence of the Morbach monster was triggering something beyond the physical, a kind of supernatural energy that disturbed not only humans, but even animals. Animals seemed to sense a danger that human eyes could not detect. The feeling that something other than the bipedal wolf was at work grew stronger with each passing night. In one particular episode, the base's monitoring systems simply stopped working exactly when the monster was supposedly sighted near the barracks. Technicians reviewed everything, and there was no logical explanation for the equipment's failure. For some, this was a clear sign that the Morbach monster was surrounded by an aura of paranormal phenomena. It was as if technology itself was succumbing to its presence. It wasn't just the physical, it was the invisible, the immaterial, that seemed to want to show its strength. The base's dogs, known for their sense of smell and courage, became the protagonists of their own mystery. Normally, nothing would stop them, but strangely, when they approached certain areas, they would stop, bark, and even retreat, something completely out of character for them. For the soldiers, the dogs' reaction was a clear indication that they were facing something much bigger than a mere creature. Folklore says that animals have a special perception of the supernatural, and there, in that darkness, it seemed as if the dogs confirmed every werewolf story and urban legend that was told. These phenomena created an atmosphere of almost tangible suspense, a type of fear that went beyond common sense. It wasn't just a matter of seeing the Morbach monster or not. It was what was felt around him. More superstitious soldiers began to avoid certain night shifts and to carry amulets, in an attempt to protect themselves against something that not even they could define. It was as if the legend of the Morbach monster had a life of its own, shaping reality in unexpected ways, and the paranormal phenomena only reinforced this feeling. With each technical failure and each shrill bark of the dogs, the Morbach monster became even more deeply rooted in the daily life of the base, like an invisible and inescapable presence. The air base, which should have been a place of safety and order, became, every day, the perfect setting for a horror story. The expectation of a new supernatural phenomenon kept everyone on alert, And between the lines, each soldier knew that the next step would be a definitive test of his sanity and courage. As the stories about the Morbach monster gained momentum, a detail emerged that made the soldiers reflect on the possible trigger for these events. Legend had it that, near the base, there was an ancient shrine dedicated to protective spirits, a mystical point that, according to the locals, served as a barrier against dark forces. The story took a dark turn when it was discovered that this shrine had been desecrated, perhaps by someone who was unaware of its power, or worse, who did not believe in it. And it was from this incident that the appearances of the Morbach monster began to intensify. The desecration of a sacred place, in the culture of many peoples, is more than a physical act. It is a violation that echoes in other dimensions. German folklore, as in other cultures, has its own legends of protection and curses, which are not easily ignored. They say that, by disrupting the balance of a place like that, occult forces are given permission to cross the line that separates the physical from the spiritual world. And for the soldiers who had already witnessed the Morbach monster, this explanation seemed to make sense. The creature, then, was not just an urban legend, but a kind of sentinel or avenger awakened by the transgression. This incident with the sanctuary brought up discussions about respect for local traditions and myths, something that many soldiers began to see in a different light. For them, the Morbach monster could be reacting to this lack of respect as a supernatural response to something that should not have been violated. In a way, this creature represented the revenge of nature itself, a manifestation of ancient beliefs. These beliefs, when disrespected, do not hesitate to exact their price. For those who witnessed the inexplicable, this explanation was a way to understand why events had gotten out of control. As a result, the atmosphere at the base became even more tense. Many began to fear not only the Morbach monster, but also what it symbolized, a force that, perhaps, could not be contained by conventional methods. Some soldiers even avoided the place where the desecrated shrine stood, fearful that the very essence of the place had been contaminated. This desecration, seemingly insignificant to some, was seen as the heart of the entire legend. Who could say that tampering with the sacred would not have consequences? And so, the mystery deepened even more, with each detail forming a story full of layers and meanings. The Morbach monster ceased to be just a lurking creature and became the very spirit of a violated shrine, a reminder that certain legends should not be challenged. And as the soldiers continued to live with this presence, each new day felt like a step closer to a greater revelation. It was just waiting for the right moment to come to light. Now that you know this disturbing story, the question remains, do you believe that certain forces truly cannot be contained? Stories like that of the Morbach monster make us question the extent to which reality and the supernatural intersect. What would have happened if this desecration had not occurred? Or do these legends somehow find a way to manifest themselves, whether in the form of a monster or a mystery that we cannot solve? Perhaps there is something deeper in the connection between our world and folklore, something that ensures that these stories never completely disappear.